Agatha Raisin and the Scandal That Ruined Everything. Good evening, and welcome, dear friends. Agatha sensed something wrong the moment she stepped outside. Her garden table, empty moments earlier, now held a single envelope sealed in dark red wax. Inside, one line waited. Your past is about to ruin everything. As the night air stilled around her, Agatha whispered, "Who dared threaten her now?" Before Agatha steps into today's mystery, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? It warms our hearts knowing how far Agatha's little adventures travel. Your comments truly keep this cozy corner alive. And if these stories bring you comfort, do subscribe so you never miss a moment. So let's begin.
Chapter 1. A Quiet Village Shaken. Agatha Raisin had been enjoying one of those rare evenings when the world finally behaved itself. The cottage was quiet, the kettle murmured contentedly on the stove, and the fading glow of sunset brushed warm color across the garden. She had settled into her favorite armchair with a blanket over her knees, feeling almost proud of herself for achieving something resembling tranquility. Peace, however, had never been a loyal companion in her life, and tonight it betrayed her with quiet, unsettling precision. When she rose to fetch her tea, she happened to glance through the kitchen window toward the small wooden table that sat in the center of her garden. At first she thought her eyes were playing tricks in the dimming light. Then she stepped closer, peering out with growing confusion. Something pale lay on the table, positioned neatly as though placed with deliberate care. An envelope. A single cream-colored envelope that most certainly had not been there half an hour ago. Agatha froze, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the sink. The garden gate hadn't squeaked, the gravel path outside her cottage hadn't crunched, no footsteps, no voices, not even the sound of a passing car had hinted at company. Yet someone had crossed her garden, walked straight up to the table, and left something with her name on it. She knew because she could see the bold black letters from where she stood. Agatha Raisin. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. The air carried a faint chill, enough to raise goosebumps across her arms, though she wasn't convinced it came from the temperature alone. The envelope waited, perfectly still, as if challenging her to touch it. She lifted it carefully. The paper felt thick, almost stiff, the way expensive stationery feels when used for important occasions, or dire ones. The handwriting struck her first. It wasn't elegant or rushed, but firm, confident, and unfamiliar. She ran her thumb along the sealed edge, noticing it had been pressed shut tightly as though the sender wanted no risk of the contents slipping free prematurely. She held her breath and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in the same stark ink. "The scandal will ruin everything. Prepare yourself." Her stomach tightened. She stared at the words, trying to attach them to a specific memory, person, or lingering consequence of her past. Nothing aligned neatly. Her mind sifted quickly through former clients, old adversaries, dissatisfied acquaintances, and meddlesome villagers who had once found her too brash, too bold, or too curious for comfort. She couldn't recall any scandal waiting to erupt, no secret hanging over her in a threatening way. Still, something about the phrasing nagged her. It felt personal. It felt like the sender knew her well enough to guess what might frighten her most. Not physical harm, but public exposure, humiliation, reputation unraveling thread by thread. She read the sentence again, slower this time, listening to the faint rustle of leaves behind her, uncertain whether it was only the wind. For a moment she considered marching straight to Mrs. Bloxby's cottage, but she pictured the vicar's wife's gentle eyes widening with worry, and somehow that made the decision harder. She didn't want to involve anyone yet, not until she understood what this message threatened. Instead, she tucked the paper back inside the envelope and pressed it to her chest. Her thoughts wandered to recent encounters, brief conversations that now seemed strangely colder in hindsight. A glance from a passerby that lingered a moment too long. A whisper that had fallen silent when she approached the village shop. Had something already begun circulating? Had some shadow of rumor crept through Carsely without her noticing? Standing there in the quiet dusk, Agatha sensed it clearly. This envelope was only the beginning. Someone, somewhere, had decided to watch her, and that someone had just taken the first move.
Morning sunlight filtered through Agatha's curtains in soft golden stripes, but the warmth did little to ease the knot that had settled in her stomach overnight. The envelope lay on her bedside table, its presence impossible to ignore. She dressed with brisk efficiency, more to steady her nerves than from any real urgency, and stepped outside into the calm village air. Carsely looked as picturesque as ever, neat hedges, clipped lawns, and cottages that seemed almost too tranquil to hold secrets. Yet Agatha felt a faint tension humming beneath the surface, like a cord pulled taut. As she walked toward the village green, she noticed the first odd look. Old Mr. Jenkins, usually cheerful and ready with a comment about the weather, paused mid-step when he saw her. His expression flickered. Surprise, discomfort, something else. And he quickly turned away, pretending to fuss with the straps of his marketing bag. Agatha raised an eyebrow, but kept moving. One odd interaction could be dismissed. Two, however, would prove harder. She didn't have to wait long. Near the notice board, two women leaned close together, whispering. When Agatha approached, their conversation snapped shut like a book slammed closed. One forced a smile. The other busied herself adjusting her scarf, even though it was already perfectly straight. Agatha stopped just long enough to read the latest community announcements, though she absorbed none of the words. She could feel the women watching her from the corners of their eyes. She continued toward the vicarage, hoping Mrs. Blocksby might calm her nerves or simply offer her familiar kindness. But when the vicar's wife emerged from her front gate, basket in hand, something in her demeanor felt off. She greeted Agatha politely, too politely, with a formality she rarely used. Her eyes wavered, skimming past Agatha's face rather than meeting it. "Morning, Mrs. Blocksby," Agatha said lightly, testing the atmosphere. "Good morning, Agatha," Mrs. Blocksby replied, shifting her basket. "Lovely day, isn't it?" Her tone was pleasant, but her gaze flicked toward the churchyard as though she needed to be somewhere else immediately. Agatha tilted her head. "Are you all right? You seem rushed." "Just errands," Mrs. Blocksby said, already stepping away. "Do enjoy your morning." She didn't wait for an answer. Agatha watched her go, unsettled. If even Mrs. Blocksby, gentle, steady Mrs. Blocksby, was acting strangely, then something was definitely amiss. The envelope's warning whispered back to her, unwelcome and persistent. Trying to regain composure, Agatha headed toward the bakery. The scent of warm pastries greeted her as she opened the door, but her momentary comfort faded quickly. Roy Silver was inside, chatting with the baker about an upcoming charity event. Normally, he would have rushed over to greet her with dramatic enthusiasm, but today he stiffened slightly, his smile faltering before returning in exaggerated fashion. "Agatha, darling," he said, a fraction too loud. "Didn't expect to see you this early." She folded her arms. "Just out for a walk. Why? Should I not be?" Roy's laugh came out thin. "Of course you should. Freedom of movement and all that." He cleared his throat, suddenly fascinated by a rack of scones. While Agatha waited for her order, she sensed someone staring. At the back of the bakery, a man she didn't recognize sat alone, a half-eaten pastry on his plate. His eyes, dark and unreadable, followed her with quiet intensity. He looked away only when she met his gaze directly. Agatha retrieved her bag of pastries and stepped outside. Immediately, she heard two villagers near the green speaking in low tones. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the words carried, her secret already spreading. Agatha froze. The speakers walked away quickly, as if aware they'd been overheard. She stood still for a moment, gripping the warm paper bag. Whatever the envelope had set in motion, the village already felt different, and Carsely, it seemed, knew something she didn't. Chapter 2. The First Cracks in the Story. Agatha knocked lightly on Mrs. Blocksby's door, hoping the familiar sound would bring a sense of normalcy. The vicar's wife opened it quickly, her cheeks flushed as though she had been bustling about indoors. She offered a warm smile, but it lacked its usual ease, and Agatha immediately sensed. Chapter 2. The First Cracks in the Story. Agatha knocked lightly on Mrs. Blocksby's door, hoping the familiar sound would bring a sense of normalcy. The vicar's wife opened it quickly, her cheeks flushed as though she had been bustling about indoors. She offered a warm smile, but it lacked its usual ease, and Agatha immediately sensed a subtle tension lingering behind it. "Agatha, come in," Mrs. Blocksby said, stepping aside. Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it that made Agatha pause. The kitchen smelled faintly of freshly baked scones, a comforting aroma that usually coaxed her to relaxation. Today, however, it did little to settle her nerves. She stepped inside, noting immediately that the small kitchen table, where they often sipped tea together, held an unopened letter, its envelope pristine and stiff, resting at an odd angle, as if it had been left in a hurry. "Something on your mind?" Mrs. Blocksby asked, pouring tea with precise, deliberate movements. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the otherwise composed posture she tried to maintain. Agatha perched on the edge of a chair, adjusting her shawl. I thought I might seek a friendly ear. Carsely feels a bit off lately." She chose her words carefully, testing the waters. "And I wondered if you might know why." Mrs. Blocksby froze for just a heartbeat. Her teacup paused halfway to her lips. "Now, Agatha, we must be careful not to feed gossip flames," she said softly, an unusual phrase that set Agatha's instincts tingling. The vicar's wife's eyes darted toward the unopened letter as if it were both a shield and a warning. Agatha leaned forward slightly. "Gossip flames?" she repeated, the words catching her attention. "You never talk like that. Is there something I should know?" Mrs. Blocksby's hands clenched briefly around the teacup. I just mean that sometimes curiosity spreads faster than truth. We must not encourage it." Her eyes met Agatha's for a fleeting moment, then shifted quickly, avoiding the subject entirely. Agatha noted the subtle nervous gestures, the tapping of a finger against the rim of the cup, the quick glance at the letter. Something was clearly being hidden, though Mrs. Blocksby's gentle demeanor kept the edges softened. "You're worried about the scandal?" Agatha asked carefully, choosing her words like a tightrope walker. Mrs. Blocksby flinched ever so slightly, a faint tightening of her lips, before she forced herself to smile. "Scandal is a strong word," she said, her voice lighter than her expression suggested. "Sometimes a misunderstanding is enough to set tongues wagging, and one must be cautious about what they let others see." Agatha's eyes swept the room, lingering on the letter once more. She could feel the air thickening with unspoken truths, and she suspected that Mrs. Blocksby had nearly said something she intended to, but stopped herself at the last second. There was a hesitation in her that spoke louder than words, a pause pregnant with significance. "Very well," Agatha said, keeping her tone measured. "I won't press if you prefer to keep things to yourself, but do know that I'll be careful too. If there is danger or something someone wants hidden, perhaps it's better handled together." Mrs. Blocksby's eyes softened slightly, though a shadow of worry remained. "Perhaps," she murmured, her fingers brushing against the edge of the unopened envelope. It was as if the letter alone carried the weight of the secret she could not yet voice. The silence between them was filled with gentle tension, a quiet acknowledgement that their bond, usually so reliable, now contained an undercurrent of uncertainty. Agatha stood and prepared to leave, feeling a mix of reassurance and unease. Whatever Mrs. Blocksby was hiding, Agatha knew she would eventually uncover it, and soon enough, the village whispers would demand answers from them both. Agatha strolled down the cobbled path toward the village green, trying to ignore the lingering unease from her visit to Mrs. Blocksby. The morning air carried a crispness that usually invigorated her, but today it only seemed to sharpen her awareness. Every sound and movement amplified. Children's laughter echoed from the schoolyard. Dogs barked in the distance, and the rustling of leaves in the old oak trees sounded almost conspiratorial. She felt as though the village itself were holding its breath, and she, unknowingly, had become the center of attention. Near the corner by the old fountain, two villagers stood close, their heads bent together in hushed conversation. Agatha slowed her pace, pretending to admire the neat flower beds, but her ears picked up snippets of words that made her blood run cold. "Don't know if she suspects, but it'll be public by Friday," one voice murmured, low enough to seem casual, yet deliberate. "The incident from years ago. Everyone's forgotten, but it fits perfectly now," replied the other, a tone of satisfaction underlining their words. Agatha froze in place, her mind racing. The incident they mentioned was from long before, a minor professional misstep she had buried deep in memory, a moment of weakness she never imagined anyone would recall. And yet, someone was dredging it up, twisting it into a story that made her look reckless, careless, even culpable. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to breathe calmly, shifting her attention to the villagers' gestures. The first speaker glanced around nervously, then smiled faintly, as if amused at having been overheard. Agatha's eyes narrowed. This wasn't accidental chatter. This was deliberate, strategic, the kind of rumor that had been planted with purpose. Someone wanted her reputation tarnished, and they had started well before she realized it. She continued past them, letting the conversation carry on behind her. The whispers grew fainter, but she caught the last fragment. No one would suspect it. Just wait until Friday. Agatha's lips pressed together. Friday. That was only a few days away, and whatever this person planned would soon become public knowledge. She walked faster, feeling both fear and an unexpected surge of determination. Carsley's villagers had always had opinions, but this was beyond idle gossip. This was calculated, a premeditated attempt to manipulate perception, and she would not let it happen without understanding who was responsible. Her thoughts drifted to her past encounters with the villagers, all the subtle glances and offhand remarks that had now taken on new meaning. That shopkeeper's fleeting frown, the clerk's overly polite tone, the way some neighbors had lingered just long enough to be noticed, each small detail coalesced into a pattern that suggested she was being watched, assessed, and maneuvered against. Her fingers brushed her satchel instinctively, as though she could clutch the tangible weight of her resolve. She replayed events from months past, recalling interactions she had dismissed as mundane. A compliment that had seemed sincere, a disagreement that felt trivial, a question that appeared casual. They were all pieces in a puzzle she was now beginning to recognize. The thought was unsettling, but it ignited a quiet spark within her. Whoever was using her past against her underestimated her curiosity, her persistence, and her keen eye for detail. Agatha straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. She would uncover the truth, track the rumors to their source, and understand exactly who had dared to weaponize her history. As she passed the fountain and continued along the green, she cast one last glance at the whispering villagers. They were oblivious to her awareness, their secret confidence unbroken. But Agatha smiled faintly. Let them talk. Let the rumor spread. By Friday, she would already be several steps ahead. Chapter 3. Suspicions Take Root. Agatha spotted him again on Lilac Lane, leaning casually against the wrought iron gate of a modest cottage she barely recognized. His dark coat flapped slightly in the breeze, and he held a leather-bound notebook in one hand, flipping through it as though recording every detail of the street. She had seen him before, twice in the village square, once outside the bakery, but each encounter had been fleeting, nothing she could act upon. Today, she decided, would be different. "Good morning," she called, her tone carefully neutral as she approached. He looked up abruptly, as if startled, though his expression quickly settled into something polite and practiced. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin," he said, bowing his head slightly. "I've been hoping our paths would cross." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "And why would that be?" "Allow me to introduce myself," he said smoothly, holding out a gloved hand. "I am Edward Merrick, local historian. I'm documenting Carsley's history, notable residents, and the social fabric of the village." Agatha studied him carefully. He looked harmless enough, tidy and polite, but there was a keen edge to his eyes, the sort of attention that pricked at her instincts. "A historian, you say? And you just happen to be asking questions about me?" she asked, stepping closer. Merrick smiled faintly, opening his notebook. "It's all part of understanding the village's past and present, you see. Your name came up frequently in old records, particularly regarding your early career in London. Your first PR client, for instance. Fascinating work, if I may say so myself." Agatha's stomach fluttered with unease. How could the stranger know such specific details? She had always been careful about her past, keeping personal and professional matters well apart. "I see," she said slowly. "And what exactly is your interest in that?" "Unfinished business," Merrick said casually, flipping a page. "Some stories, you see, never truly conclude. One must always account for lingering threads, loose ends, unresolved matters." His eyes met her sharply, lingering with just enough intensity to unsettle her. Agatha felt a flicker of suspicion. Was this man merely curious, or had he been sent to probe, to dig for something useful to someone else? She studied his mannerisms, the precision of his words, the careful choice of phrases, the way he avoided giving any indication of his true purpose. "And these lingering threads," she said carefully, "you think they could cause trouble if mishandled?" "Potentially," Merrick admitted, closing the notebook. "History is rarely forgiving. Even minor oversights can echo, sometimes in unexpected ways. One must be vigilant." "I know," she said, attempting lightness. "Thank you for the lesson in history, Mr. Merrick. I'll keep my threads tidy, I promise." Merrick inclined his head politely, but the shadow of a smirk flickered at the corner of his mouth. Indeed, one never knows which strands might be tugged next. When he stepped away, notebook tucked neatly under his arm, Agatha couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this encounter was no accident. Someone was watching. Someone had orchestrated at least part of this meeting, and as she turned back toward the heart of the village, her mind whirled with possibilities. Was Merrick simply curious? Or was he already a player in the game threatening her quiet life in Carsely? Either way, she knew instinctively that nothing in this village could be taken for face value anymore. The bell above the bakery door jingled sharply, announcing Roy Silver's arrival before he even appeared in the doorway. Agatha looked up from her scone, half expecting the usual charmingly exaggerated greeting, and was met instead with Roy's familiar whirlwind of energy, his eyes wide and sparkling with a peculiar mixture of excitement and alarm. He clutched a folded tabloid in one hand, holding it close to his chest as though it were a precious artifact, or a ticking time bomb. "Agatha, darling!" he exclaimed, spinning toward her with his usual flair. "You simply must see this." She set her pastry down slowly, adopting her most patient expression. "Must I? Or is this another of your dramatic demonstrations of everyday life?" "Not at all, my dear, not at all," Royce said, moving closer, his coat-tails swaying theatrically. He waved the paper tantalizingly, but kept the headline hidden from view. "But it concerns you." "Deeply." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "I see. And why the secrecy? Are we talking about a sale in the shop, or perhaps a misplaced garden gnome?" Roy's laughter was sharp, almost nervous. "Far more serious than a garden gnome, I'm afraid. But patience, Agatha. One must savor the build-up. Now." He paused,
making her wait as he carefully unfolded the tabloid, revealing only a glimpse of the headline. Bold letters, partially obscured, yet enough to catch her eye. Her stomach sunk. The words hinted at her past, insinuating involvement in some scandal she had long forgotten or long buried. The article suggested impropriety, mismanagement, and whispers of misdeeds, though no explicit accusation was fully printed. Yet there was just enough detail, just enough connection to her actual history to make the story dangerous. Roy leaned in conspiratorially. "See here, notice the anonymous informant. Very mysterious, very dramatic. And here, blurry letters where names should be. Someone from Carsely might have tipped them off. Yes, I do suspect." Agatha snatched the paper from his hand, scanning the lines with growing horror. The words were sensationalized, of course, exaggerated for effect, but beneath the sensationalism lay fragments of truth she knew could be twisted, shared, and misunderstood. She felt a flush of panic, quickly followed by a surge of indignation. Whoever had done this had deliberately sought to tarnish her reputation, using old stories and half-remembered details as ammunition. "Do you realize what this implies?" she demanded, her voice steadying as her fury began to focus. "Even a hint like this could undo everything I've worked for. People will believe it. They always do when it's printed." Roy raised his hands theatrically, retreating a step as though warding off her scolding. I know, but isn't the drama just delicious? And think, darling, if we can trace the source, someone from our very own village might have contacted the paper. I'd bet my last penny on it." Agatha's eyes narrowed. "And the informant?" "Ah, anonymous. They are cunning, shadowed, unseen. Very, very clever indeed, and delightfully frustrating for anyone trying to get to the bottom of it." She folded her arms, taking a deep breath to calm the mixture of panic and determination roiling inside her. Whoever had orchestrated this wanted to destabilize her, to turn Carsely into a nest of suspicion directed at her alone. The article had struck precisely where it would hurt: her pride, her reputation, and her sense of security in her own village. Agatha straightened, her mind already calculating her next steps. She would uncover the truth. She would find the anonymous informant, identify the villager who leaked information, and ensure the narrative of her past no longer hung like a threat over her life. As Roy flitted to the counter, chattering about potential leads and imagined conspiracies, Agatha folded the tabloid carefully, her expression composed, but her mind sharp. The game had begun, and she intended to play it on her own terms. Chapter 4. Threads of the Past. The train rattled along the tracks toward London, carrying Agatha Raisin away from the quaint calm of Carsely and into the bustling heart of her former professional life. She stared out the window at the blur of countryside giving way to suburbs, and then to the dense, familiar cityscape. Each passing street and building stirred memories she had long tucked away, some fond, some uncomfortable, and she felt a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension tighten in her chest. Today's purpose, however, left little room for sentimentality. She needed answers, and she needed them quickly. Her first stop was the office where she had spent the early years of her PR career. The tall glass doors loomed above her, sleek and modern, but she noticed subtle changes. New signage, security keypads, a receptionist she didn't recognize. As she approached the desk, the young woman behind it gave her a polite but nervous smile. "Good morning," Agatha said brightly, attempting warmth. "I'm here to see, to inquire about some old files and colleagues. I used to work here some years ago." The receptionist blinked rapidly and glanced toward the office corridor before focusing back on her screen. "Oh, yes. We haven't had any visitors like that recently," she said, her voice too quick, too measured. Something about the hesitation made Agatha's instincts flare. "Really?" Agatha pressed gently.
Because I have reason to believe someone's been asking about me lately. Files, projects, perhaps even my old office. The receptionist's fingers stilled over the keyboard. I don't know what you mean, she said, her tone almost too calm, as if willing the conversation to end. Agatha made a note to follow up discreetly later. She moved deeper into the office, observing colleagues bustling past in muted suits, laptops clutched to chests. A few familiar faces recognized her with polite curiosity, but the conversations were clipped, almost cautious. One former coworker muttered a vague warning. Strange inquiries have been coming in. Nothing official, but people are curious. Agatha nodded, absorbing the information like a sponge. Whoever was stirring the scandal in Carsely seemed to have extended their reach back to London. Her heart thudded as she approached her old workspace. The door was slightly ajar, the desk untouched, but for a thin layer of dust and an empty file slot where a particular folder should have been. She crouched to inspect the archives. Several files had been removed, documents she remembered handling meticulously years ago. Someone had targeted specific information, selecting it with knowledge only an insider could possess. She straightened, running her hand through her hair, and noticed a folded piece of paper tucked discreetly in the edge of her bag, which she hadn't carried inside. Pulling it out, her pulse quickened. In neat, deliberate handwriting was one phrase: "Stop digging." Agatha's lips pressed into a thin line, her curiosity igniting further rather than quelling. Whoever had left the note clearly knew she was investigating and intended to warn her off. She slipped the paper back into her bag and took a slow, measured breath. Threats or intimidation were nothing new, but they only strengthened her resolve. Her eyes flicked toward a small security monitor tucked into the corner. On it, CCTV footage displayed someone entering her former office, someone whose face was partially obscured by a hood. They had taken the files with careful, deliberate precision, leaving almost no trace except the faint disturbance of papers. Agatha's mind raced as she tried to identify a connection, realizing that this act was far more than casual mischief. It was calculated, personal, and designed to unsettle her. And Agatha Raisin, ever observant and determined, vowed silently that she would unravel it, no matter how tangled the threads from the past had become.
Agatha stepped off the train at Carsely Station, the familiar sense of damp earth and blooming hedgerows washing over her. She had returned from London with a sense of both purpose and unease, carrying the weight of missing files and the cryptic warning slipped into her bag. The village seemed unchanged at first glance, peaceful in its routines, yet she could feel the undercurrent of tension that had been growing these past days. Every glance from a neighbor, every whispered exchange felt amplified, as though the village itself were holding its breath. She made her way to Bill Wong's office, a modest building tucked behind the church. Bill, always precise and calm, met her at the door, his dark eyes sharp with concern. He gestured for her to enter, and she followed, closing the door against the quiet hum of village life. "Agatha," he said, his voice low, "I've been expecting you." "Bill," she replied, trying to keep her tone light, "I've just returned from London. It's complicated." She laid out the missing files and the note, watching his expression carefully. Bill nodded slowly, the lines on his face deepening. "I don't envy your position, Agatha. Stirring up old cases, it has a way of attracting attention you might not want." His pause was heavy with unspoken meaning. "Attention?" she prompted, though she had a feeling she already knew the answer. "Questions are being asked," he said quietly. "Villagers have been approached, interviewed about you, about the past, about anything they can remember. Someone is collecting stories, twisting them, preparing, well, let's say they are weaponizing information." His eyes flicked briefly to the door, as though someone might be listening. Agatha's pulse quickened. Collected stories? But why? Who could have that kind of reach in Carsely? Bill shrugged, though the movement lacked conviction. It could be anyone with influence, a grudge, or even someone, we wouldn't expect. Official channels are risky. The more authorities are involved, the more attention the scandal might draw. His gaze softened for a moment. Even Mrs. Bloxby has been questioned, indirectly. She didn't say much, but she's concerned, naturally. And you know her, she wouldn't hide anxiety if it weren't warranted. Agatha's stomach tightened. She had sensed Mrs. Bloxby's unease before, and now it confirmed the village was not merely whispering, they were being coaxed to talking. Bill leaned closer, lowering his voice. There's a name circulating in these inquiries, partially revealed, only fragments, but it's enough to hint at someone with a vested interest in your reputation. I cannot disclose everything, but keep it in mind. The rest must be discovered carefully. Agatha nodded, absorbing the weight of his caution. She appreciated his honesty and restraint, yet frustration flickered at the edges of her composure. How much longer could she maneuver through the fog of half-truths and hidden motives before someone struck decisively? As she stood to leave, she noticed something pinned to her door. A small slip of paper, pale and folded. She unfolded it carefully, reading the message scrawled in sharp, deliberate handwriting. Let the past rot. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The threat was clear, yet it only strengthened her resolve. Whoever was orchestrating this intended to intimidate her, but Agatha had long learned that fear rarely guided her decisions. Bill offered a brief nod, an acknowledgement of her determination. Be cautious, Agatha. The more the past is stirred, the more dangerous it becomes. And remember, someone in the village is watching every step. She left his office, the sun dipping low behind the familiar cottages, casting long shadows across the green. Agatha's mind whirled with possibilities, half-names, threats, and warnings. She had allies, and she had clues, but the labyrinth of rumor, manipulation, and concealed intentions was growing more intricate by the hour. Carsely felt smaller, more intimate, yet infinitely more treacherous. And Agatha Raisin, determined as ever, resolved that she would unravel the truth before the village's whispers became a tidal wave that could engulf her entirely.
Chapter 5. The Mask Slips. Agatha arrived at Mrs. Bloxby's cottage with a mix of trepidation and resolve. The vicar's wife greeted her with a faint, nervous smile, but it failed to reach her eyes. Something had shifted. The warmth that usually infused her presence now seemed clouded by fear. Agatha closed the door behind her and stepped inside, sensing that this visit would not follow their usual gentle rhythms. Mrs. Bloxby, Agatha began, her voice calm but firm, we need to speak openly. No half-truths, no diversions. I need to understand what's happening, and you need to trust me. Mrs. Bloxby's hands twisted together nervously, the faint tremor betraying her composed exterior. Mrs. Bloxby, she faltered, glancing toward the window, as though hoping the trees outside might offer an escape. Agatha stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her friend's arm. It's me. You've always been honest with me before. If there's something from your past that's being used against you or against me, please tell me, now. For a long moment, Mrs. Bloxby remained silent, tears brimming but held back by years of self-restraint. Finally, a shuddering sigh escaped her lips. Many years ago, she began quietly, I made a small mistake. I thought it harmless at the time, a single lapse in judgment, but someone discovered it. Her voice wavered, the rare display of vulnerability striking Agatha sharply in the chest. Agatha's brow furrowed. Someone discovered it? And now they're using it? Mrs. Bloxby nodded, blinking rapidly to clear tears. Yes, they demanded I remain silent about recent events. They said I must let you drown, Agatha. Let the scandal take its course. I couldn't resist at first. I thought I could protect everyone by staying quiet. Agatha's heart pounded. The phrase sent a shiver down her spine. "Let me drown? They're threatening you to stay silent?" "Yes," Mrs. Blocksby whispered, her voice trembling. "I had no choice. They knew how much I care about you, and they exploited it. I felt trapped, afraid, and guilty." Agatha moved closer, taking her friend's hands in her own. "Mrs. Blocksby, you don't have to carry this alone. I'm still here. We'll face this together." A sob broke from Mrs. Blocksby, a rare and raw sound that echoed through the quiet cottage. Agatha felt a pang of both sorrow and determination. This revelation, painful and human, only deepened her resolve. Between shaky breaths, Mrs. Blocksby pressed a folded slip of paper into Agatha's palm. "I can't say much, but here, one initial, one letter connected to the culprit. It's all I can risk revealing." Agatha unfolded the paper, her eyes narrowing at the single, bold letter scrawled across it. C. Agatha's mind raced. The initial could point to anyone, yet it was a start, a thread she could follow. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady but edged with resolve. "This will help. And you must know, your honesty now changes everything. We are not powerless." Mrs. Blocksby nodded, leaning back slightly as though some weight had been lifted, though the tension lingered in her shoulders. The vulnerability of the moment left both women quiet, their shared understanding unspoken but profound. Agatha realized how much courage it had taken for her friend to admit the truth and how much trust had been restored between them. Agatha let the moment linger, absorbing the gravity of the confession. Then, with a small, determined nod, she spoke. "We'll find the person behind this. No one threatens you or me without consequence. Starting with the clues you've given me, we will uncover everything. And I promise you, Mrs. Blocksby, you will no longer have to bear this alone." The vicar's wife exhaled slowly, tears glistening, but softened now by hope. The bond between them, tested and strained by fear, had emerged stronger, united in the determination to confront the shadows haunting Carsely.
Agatha returned to her cottage that evening, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the tidy garden she usually found comforting. The events of the day weighed heavily on her, yet her mind was alive with activity. Mrs. Blocksby's confession, the initials she had revealed, and the subtle hints from the London trip all swirled together, forming threads she could begin to weave into a coherent picture. She set her bag down, noticing the neat stack of newspapers she had left at the Boar had been shifted. Someone had rifled through her bin. Her fingers tightened around the edge of a folder she carried, flipping it open to review her notes. She jotted down observations, connecting the village whispers, anonymous threats, and subtle glances she had collected over the past weeks. Each encounter with a villager now took on new significance. The hurried steps of a neighbor, the over-politeness of a shopkeeper, and the casual comments in the bakery all seemed to fit into a pattern she had been assembling in her mind. 3 particular villagers stood out. Each had a plausible motive, each had been acting strangely, and remarkably, all 3 shared a common timeline during the period in question. Late nights in the village, fleeting visits to certain offices, and sudden disappearances at moments of subtle tension. Agatha's pen traced lines connecting their movements, plotting potential interactions with the mysterious puppet master orchestrating the scandal. Her sharp eyes noticed small, telling details. A smear of ink on a sleeve, a hastily covered garden window, a discarded wrapper out of place. Each hint, while minor alone, added weight to her developing theory. Whoever was manipulating the villagers had influence, knowledge, and patience. This was no random gossip. It was careful, deliberate, and designed to entangle the whole village in a web of suspicion. As she examined her notes, a coded slip of paper appeared under her door. She bent to retrieve it, holding it to the light. The symbols were unfamiliar at first, a combination of letters, numbers, and small shapes. Yet as she studied it, a pattern began to emerge. The note suggested timing, meeting places, and possibly the next moves of someone attempting to unsettle her. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of the chase. Whoever had left it wanted her to notice, and notice she had. She reflected on the dynamics of Carsely itself. Old grudges, property disputes, rivalries, long-buried tensions that had never fully healed were now being pulled to the surface. Romantic envy, minor thefts, and professional jealousy all intersected with the current scandal. Each piece fit together like a complex puzzle, but the picture it formed was troubling. Someone was using these threads strategically, turning ordinary villagers into unwitting instruments of manipulation. Agatha set her pen down and leaned back, letting her mind rest for a moment. The realization settled over her. Multiple people were being puppeteered, and the same hand guided each subtle action. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, and the path to truth would require careful observation, cunning, and patience. The cottage was quiet, the evening sky darkening above. Agatha's instincts, sharpened by years of navigating both professional and personal intrigues, hummed with focus. She would begin to track movements more closely, follow patterns, and record every anomaly. The puppet master had underestimated her. She was ready to uncover every hidden motive, to untangle the web and reveal the true orchestrator behind the scandal threatening Carsely and herself. Her eyes drifted to the coded note once more. Whoever had left it thought they were in control, but Agatha Raisin had always thrived on challenges. The game was far from over. Chapter 6. The Net Tightens. The quiet of Agatha's cottage was broken by a faint tapping at the window, a soft, urgent rhythm that made her pulse quicken. The clock on the mantel read well past 10, and the village had long since surrendered to slumber. She moved cautiously toward the sound, a candle flickering in her hand, and peered through the glass. A shadow shifted in the garden, small and trembling. "Agatha!" a whispered voice called. She unlatched the window, and a young villager slipped inside, glancing nervously over their shoulder as if the night itself might betray them. Their eyes were wide with fear, hands shaking as they held something tightly against their chest. "You shouldn't be here," Agatha said softly, lowering the candle so it didn't blind them. "What is it? Who sent you?" The villager swallowed, their throat tight. I can't say names. I'd be ruined, worse than ruined, but I had to tell someone, and I trust you." Her voice cracked, revealing the gravity of what they carried. Agatha gestured toward a chair. "Sit, quietly. Start from the beginning." The villager perched on the edge, wringing their hands. They paid me to spread lies about you, about old events, things that happened years ago. I was promised something in return, safety, favor, money. I don't even remember what exactly." Her voice trembled with shame. Agatha's mind raced. Someone had been manipulating multiple villagers, but the scale now became horrifyingly clear. "And you agreed?" she asked, her tone gentle but firm. The villager lowered their gaze, ashamed. "I had no choice. They said, the final strike is tomorrow. If I refused, they'd come for me. Or worse, expose me. I couldn't risk it." Agatha's heart tightened, but her resolve hardened. The stakes had risen beyond rumors and whispers. They were dangling threats over people's lives. She let the fear hang in the air, letting it settle in her mind as a catalyst for action rather than despair. The villager reached into their coat and produced a small key, the metal dark and engraved with a strange emblem Agatha didn't immediately recognize. They held it out, hands trembling. I was told to use this, but I never did. I thought maybe you could make sense of it. It belonged to something important." Agatha accepted the key, turning it over in her hand. The emblem was intricate, unfamiliar, yet purposeful, a marker of identity or authority. Whoever had left it was precise, careful, leaving just enough evidence to intrigue, yet not enough to incriminate openly. The villager's eyes darted toward the door, then back at Agatha. I shouldn't be here. They'll know I came. I have to go before anyone notices. They pushed themselves to their feet, clutching their coat, but paused. I'm sorry I can't tell you more. I hope it's enough. Before Agatha could respond, the villager slipped toward the window, moving with hurried, silent steps. They disappeared into the dark garden almost as quickly as they had arrived, leaving a faint rustle of leaves and a lingering sense of urgency. Agatha remained by the window, the candlelight flickering against her thoughtful face. The confession had revealed a new layer of danger, one she hadn't fully grasped before. Someone had orchestrated the lies, bribed the fearful, and planned a final strike. And now, with the mysterious key in her possession and the echo of the villager's fear still fresh, she knew the night was far from over. She placed the key on her desk carefully, its emblem catching the candlelight, and allowed herself a moment to absorb the revelation. The puzzle had grown more dangerous, and Agatha Raisin, ever persistent and vigilant, felt the surge of determination she always carried when confronted with hidden threats. Whoever had planned this final strike would soon learn that she was not to be underestimated.
Agatha found herself on Lilac Lane once more, the narrow street cloaked in the muted glow of the late afternoon sun. The historian, Edward Merrick, stood leaning against a lamp-post, as if awaiting her arrival, his leather-bound notebook tucked under his arm. His posture was casual, but the twitch of his fingers betrayed tension. Agatha approached with measured steps, her mind focused on the inconsistencies she had noticed during your previous encounter. Merrick, she said firmly, we need to talk. I've been piecing together a few details and something doesn't add up. Your story about being a mere historian, let's be honest, is far too convenient. Merrick's expression flickered. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, closing his notebook with a soft snap. I suppose you could say I've been economical with the truth, he admitted, his voice low, careful. But it's complicated, and I'm not the villain here. Agatha folded her arms. Not the villain? You've been digging into my past, asking about clients, contacts, and events that no casual historian would care about. Someone hired you. I want to know who and why. He shifted uneasily, his eyes darting toward the vicarage across the street. The gesture did not escape Agatha. I can't give you a name, he said finally, exhaling. I was contracted to gather information, yes, but my employer is careful. I don't know them directly. And frankly, I'm not comfortable with the way things have escalated. Agatha's gaze sharpened. Escalated how? Merrick, people are being threatened. Lies are being spread. Someone wants me to be ruined. You must know more than you're letting on. He swallowed, shoulders slumping slightly. The scandal, you see, the rumors, the stories, the tabloid nonsense, it's a distraction. There's something bigger in motion here in Carsely. I've been instructed to ensure attention stays on you while the real work continues elsewhere. I was never meant to harm you directly. I am merely a pawn. Agatha felt a shiver of both unease and clarity. Someone was orchestrating events from behind the scenes, and Merrick, despite his knowledge, was not fully in control. But his information was invaluable. She needed to extract everything she could. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small, torn business card. The logo was unmistakable. A London consultancy she remembered vaguely from her early PR years. This was left for me, he said, pressing it into her hand. It's a hint, a trace of who may have set this in motion. I cannot provide more. Agatha examined the card closely, noting the sharp edges and partial contact details. Even a fragment like this could lead her somewhere. She tucked it into her notebook, her mind already calculating the connections. Merrick's voice lowered further, a warning threading through his words. You should be careful, Miss Raisin. You're not supposed to survive the truth. The more you dig, the more dangerous it becomes, for you and anyone who helps. Agatha met his gaze evenly, though her pulse quickened. I've never been one to step back from danger. You've given me enough to continue, but I want transparency, Merrick.
Even pawns can speak honestly without fear of reprisal. Tell me everything you've observed, every odd detail you've noticed. No omissions." He hesitated, then exhaled, conceding the smallest nod. "Very well," he murmured, gesturing toward a nearby bench. "We can discuss it, but quietly. Every word could be critical, and every misstep noticed. Carsely is not as simple as it appears. The village conceals more than anyone suspects." Agatha followed him, notebook ready, every sense alert. The historian's admission had shifted the investigation into a new, more dangerous phase. He was a source and a warning, a reluctant guide into the tangled web the village had become. Every step now required caution, but she knew one truth clearly. Uncovering the mastermind behind the scandal would demand courage, wit, and unrelenting focus. Chapter 7. Uncovering the real plot. Agatha spread the papers across the dining table, the late afternoon sun spilling through the curtains and illuminating every crease and annotation. She had returned from the council archives, clutching a stack of documents that seemed innocuous at first glance, but upon closer inspection revealed a startling pattern. Maps, letters, and official forms all pointed toward a singular goal: land development. Someone had been manipulating the village council to secure approval for a project that would disrupt the quiet rhythm of Carsely, and they had used her scandal as a smokescreen. She traced her finger along a map that showed the village boundaries. A section that she remembered clearly had been subtly altered. Streets were rerouted, green spaces redefined, and property lines shifted ever so slightly. The changes were clever, but not enough to escape the attention of someone like Agatha. Her pulse quickened as she realized the scope. The scandal, the rumors, the blackmail, it had all been orchestrated to discredit her, ensuring she would not intervene and raise objections to the development plan. "Of course," she murmured almost to herself, "they needed me out of the way." Mrs. Blocksby entered quietly, carrying a small tray with tea, her eyes meeting Agatha's with a mixture of concern and relief. "You've been at it all day," she said softly. "I thought you might need some refreshment." Agatha gestured to the table. "It's bigger than I imagined. The scandal targeting me, it's only a distraction. The real scheme is this land deal, and someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure I wouldn't interfere." Mrs. Blocksby sat down, setting the tray aside. For the first time since the affair began, she seemed relaxed enough to speak openly. "I suspected something like this," she admitted. "There were unusual meetings at the council, documents that didn't make sense. I just didn't know how it connected to you until now." Agatha handed her a copy of a letter, the signature clearly forged. "Look at this. It's all here. Altered borders, forged signatures, manipulated votes. Someone carefully designed this entire web of deceit." Mrs. Blocksby's fingers trembled slightly as she scanned the documents. "It's audacious," she whispered, "to think that they'd use you, our friend, as a scapegoat while advancing their own agenda." Her voice broke, and for a moment she covered her mouth with both hands, overwhelmed by the audacity and cruelty of it all. Agatha leaned back, absorbing the enormity of the revelation. Her instincts had been correct from the beginning. Someone powerful, patient, and cunning had orchestrated the scandal. Every rumor, every anonymous threat, every manipulated villager had served a single purpose: to keep her distracted and powerless at the critical moment. And the blackmail, the letters, the threats, they weren't personal. They were strategic, designed to manipulate the players, including Mrs. Blocksby, without exposing the true aim. Mrs. Blocksby nodded slowly, relief mingled with lingering guilt. "It explains so much. I felt trapped, but I understand now. They exploited my loyalty to you to further their scheme, and I allowed fear to silence me." Agatha reached across the table, taking her friend's hand in reassurance. You didn't allow anything. They underestimated both of us. And now we know the real target. We can stop it before it goes any further." Together, they examined the maps and documents in careful detail. The forged signatures, the altered borders, and the strategic timing of the scandal all pointed to a single mastermind operating in the shadows. Agatha's mind raced, connecting the dots. The anonymous tips, the tabloid stories, and the carefully manipulated villagers, it was all part of a larger, more sinister plan than anyone in Carsely had suspected. For the first time in days, Agatha allowed herself a small smile. She had been led to the truth, and the path to uncovering the puppet master had become clear. The scandal had served its purpose, but now it would serve hers.
Agatha stood in the quiet of the village hall, the polished wooden floor gleaming under the soft glow of overhead lights. She had arranged the meeting with careful precision, ensuring that only the person she suspected would attend. Files and maps were discreetly stacked on the table, a visual demonstration of her investigation, while a few supportive villagers lingered at the back, silent witnesses to the confrontation she was about to orchestrate. When the door creaked open, the mastermind stepped inside, a familiar face from Carsely, someone who had always seemed unobtrusive, yet whose subtle maneuvers had shaped the turmoil around her. Their smile was thin, forced, and immediately set Agatha on edge. "I see you've uncovered quite a collection," the person said, nodding toward the evidence spread across the table. "I suppose you've been busy. Busy enough to notice patterns you thought were hidden," Agatha replied evenly. "Your attempts to manipulate the village, to use fear and rumor to control people, it stops tonight." The mastermind raised a hand, attempting a bargain. "Agatha, surely you understand. It wasn't personal. You were just in the way. I didn't anticipate your cleverness." Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Not personal? Threatening my reputation, blackmailing Mrs. Bloxby, bribing villagers, orchestrating a tabloid scandal? It all seems very personal to me." A flicker of hesitation passed across their face, the carefully maintained composure cracking. "Fine," they admitted, voice low. "Perhaps it is personal. You see, years ago, yes, you, won something I believed should have been mine. A position, a recognition, a client, whatever it was, it sparked a rivalry I never let go. Over time, small grievances compounded, and when the opportunity arose to remove you as an obstacle, well, I took it." Agatha's pulse quickened at the confession. Every rumor, every manipulated whisper now had a root, a petty seed that had grown into a sprawling scheme. The village had been unwittingly caught in a web woven from jealousy, resentment, and long-held grudges. "And the scandal?" she pressed, gesturing toward the assembled evidence. "All the lies, all the blackmail? It was the perfect distraction," the mastermind said reluctantly. "I needed you occupied, fearful, and distracted while I pursued other aims in the council. Property, influence, minor gains. I thought it clever, but I underestimated your vigilance." Agatha studied the person, noting the nervous shift in their stance, the faint quiver in their hands. "You underestimated more than my vigilance. You underestimated loyalty and courage, and the fact that truth has a way of surfacing." For a moment, the room was still, the tension palpable. Then the mastermind sighed, conceding defeat, though their eyes still searched for an angle of escape. "I suppose there's little left to bargain with. You've uncovered everything I tried to conceal. But know this, there's always a loose thread, one small detail that can never be fully controlled." Agatha's mind raced. The acknowledgement hinted at unfinished business, a final piece of the puzzle still out of reach. But for now, the immediate danger had passed. The mastermind had been cornered, their schemes exposed, and the village would no longer be manipulated under fear and rumor. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Justice had been served in a way befitting Carsley's understated charm. Clever, precise, and thorough. Still, the lingering sense of that one loose thread remained, a reminder that even the most complete victories could leave shadows. As the mastermind departed, head lowered and dignity diminished, Agatha turned to the villagers who had watched silently. Relief and quiet admiration were written across their faces. Carsley could breathe again, even if the final detail of the intrigue remained tantalizingly just beyond reach. Agatha collected the evidence, securing it carefully. The night was far from ordinary, yet she felt the familiar thrill of a challenge met, a puzzle solved, and a mystery unraveled, though she knew the village held more secrets, waiting patiently for her next investigation.
Chapter 8. Restoration and Resolve. The morning sun spilled gently across Carsely, casting a warm glow on the cobbled streets and familiar cottages. Agatha stepped out of her front door, breathing in the crisp air with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. After weeks of tension, the village seemed to be exhaling collectively. The whispers and sidelong glances had softened, replaced by nods, murmured greetings, and hesitant smiles. Her first encounter was with the baker, who had been unusually curt during the height of the scandal. "Miss Raisin," he began, shuffling his feet, I owe you an apology. I let stories cloud my judgment. Quite wrong of me, truly." Agatha accepted it with a graceful nod, her lips curving into a faint, forgiving smile. As she wandered past the green, villagers approached one by one, awkwardly fumbling over words, offering their contrite acknowledgments. Some were tinged with humor, a wink and a whispered, "We've learned our lesson about gossip thanks to you," while others were deeply sincere. Each apology, each tentative conversation, helped restore a sense of normalcy and warmth she had longed to see. Eventually, she made her way to Mrs. Blocksby's cottage. The vicar's wife met her at the gate, her expression brightening as though a weight had lifted. "Agatha," she said softly, "it feels like the village can finally breathe. I am grateful for your patience, your courage, and your unwavering friendship." I return the sentiment, stepping closer, "And I am grateful for your honesty, Mrs. Blocksby. What happened between us, it only strengthened our bond. Fear and secrecy tested us, but we made it through together." Mrs. Blocksby glanced toward the garden, a thoughtful crease appearing on her forehead, though I must admit the entire affair may have had an unintended benefit for someone else, a loose advantage gained while we were distracted. She left the statement hanging, cryptic, yet teasingly suggestive, and Agatha raised her eyebrow in mild curiosity, noting the lingering puzzle. The pair shared a quiet laugh, the tension that had once hovered between them finally dissipating. Together they walked along the familiar paths of Carsely, observing how the village had begun to return to its gentle rhythm, children chasing each other across the green, shopkeepers arranging goods with renewed cheer, neighbors exchanging cheerful greetings without the shadow of suspicion. Agatha paused at her mailbox. Discovering a small slip of paper tucked neatly inside, she unfolded it carefully, half expecting another threat or cryptic warning. Instead, it was unsigned and simply read, "Well done, Miss Raisin. Carsely owes you its peace." A shiver ran through her, not of fear, but of satisfaction. Someone remained in the background, appreciative, if anonymous, quietly acknowledging the resolution she had achieved. She tucked the note into her coat pocket, savoring the moment, and glanced at Mrs. Blocksby. Even with the peace restored, I suspect there are still stories waiting to unfold, but for now, she let her words trail, letting the calm of the village, the warmth of friendship, and the gentle sunlight convey the completion of one chapter. Mrs. Blocksby smiled, squeezing her hand. "For now, indeed. But remember, Agatha, the village has a way of keeping life interesting. Quiet is only temporary." Agatha laughed softly, the sound mingling with the ambient hum of a village returning to itself. Carsely felt alive again. Not perfectly so,
but comfortably so, and the balance of curiosity, charm, and community that defined it had been restored. She inhaled deeply, feeling the lingering thrill of resolution, the satisfaction of justice served, and the warmth of bonds reinforced. As they walked back toward the center of the village, Agatha allowed herself a moment of reflection. For all the intrigue, suspense, and shadows that had descended upon Carsely, peace had returned, and with it, a renewed sense of purpose, connection, and watchfulness, for the village's secrets never truly slept, but Agatha Raisin was ready for whatever came next.
Agatha had settled back into her cottage with a sense of tentative calm. The kettle whistled softly on the stove, birds chirped in the garden, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to enjoy a cup of tea without glancing over her shoulder. The village of Carsely had resumed its gentle rhythm, and the echoes of scandal seemed, at last, to have faded. Yet, as she stepped onto the small patio to tend her herbs, a movement caught her eye. Across the green, near the edge of the hedgerow, a figure lingered, partly obscured by shadows. Agatha froze, narrowing her eyes. The silhouette was unfamiliar, yet deliberate, watching the cottage with a steady patience that set her nerves on edge. She adjusted her stance, pretending to sweep the patio with her gardening tools, all the while keeping the figure in her peripheral vision. "Who's there?" she called casually, masking both irritation and curiosity. The figure did not respond. When she took a cautious step forward, it disappeared behind the hedgerow, as if evaporating into thin air. A shiver of both exasperation and intrigue ran through her. The scandal might have ended, but this was something new. Agatha returned inside, the sense of alertness prickling at the back of her neck. She set her teacup down and glanced toward the door, noticing a small envelope tucked neatly under the mat. Its appearance was sudden, quiet, and deliberate. Picking it up, she turned it over in her hands. There was no return address, no signature. Just her name scrawled in careful, familiar handwriting. With measured caution, she slid her finger under the seal and opened it. Inside was a single line of text, written crisply on plain stationery. "You are being watched. Not all is as it seems." Her lips pressed into a thin line, part annoyance, part thrill. The handwriting was anonymous, but the implication was unmistakable. A new chapter had begun, one that promised intrigue, observation, and secrets yet to reveal themselves. Agatha placed the letter on the kitchen table, her mind racing with possibilities. Who was watching her? A stranger? Or someone she knew yet had not recognized? Was it merely curiosity, or the precursor to a larger scheme? She allowed herself a wry smile. Carsely may appear quaint and sleepy, but beneath its calm surface, mysteries never truly slept. She looked out the window again. The green was empty now, the hedgerows still, yet the memory of the figure lingered, planting a seed of anticipation. Agatha had spent weeks unraveling a scandal, yet she instinctively knew that this new presence was not coincidental. It carried the promise of challenges, subtle manipulations, and the need for sharp observation, the very elements that had always defined her life in Carsely. Sitting down at her desk, she began making mental notes, planning her approach with that characteristic combination of prudence and curiosity. The kettle began to whistle again, steam curling upward like a small exclamation point in the quiet room. Agatha took a slow sip of her tea, savoring the warmth, the aroma, and the momentary calm before action. The village settled into evening, soft light filtering through the windows, but Agatha's eyes remained alert, scanning the horizon beyond the garden. One thing was certain. The cycle of quiet village life and hidden secrets was far from over.
And she, as always, would be at the center of it, watchful, prepared, and ready.